Canada's federal government has made a big promise. You've probably heard it in speeches, press releases, and headlines. Canada is going to become a global leader in electric vehicle manufacturing. Not just a place that buys electric cars, but a place that builds them. Factories, jobs, supply chains, long-term economic growth. It's an appealing idea. It sounds modern, competitive, and forward-looking. But when you step back from the slogans and look closely at what's actually being built, where it's happening, and how it's being paid for, the picture becomes a lot more complicated. This video isn't about whether electric vehicles are good or bad. It's not about climate politics. It's not about cheering or attacking any party. It's about something simpler. What does building the EV future actually mean, and how close is Canada to doing it? When governments talk about leadership in electric vehicles, they're usually talking about three things. First, attracting manufacturers. This means convincing global automakers to build plants inside the country instead of somewhere else. Second, creating jobs. Manufacturing jobs tend to be stable, well-paid, and politically popular, especially in regions that have lost traditional industrial work. And third, controlling part of the supply chain. Batteries, minerals, components, and logistics, not just final assembly. On paper, Canada checks a lot of boxes. It has access to raw materials, an educated workforce, proximity to the US market, and existing automotive infrastructure. So the strategy seems straightforward. Offer incentives, reduce risk for manufacturers, get factories built. But the difference between announcing a factory and building a sustainable industry is where things get more complex. Because attracting a plant is one thing, keeping it competitive for decades is something else entirely. Right now, Canada does have electric vehicle-related manufacturing, but it's important to be precise about what that actually looks like. Most Canadian facilities tied to EVs fall into one of three categories: battery production, component manufacturing, or vehicle assembly. Very few represent fully integrated end-to-end vehicle production that can operate independently in the global market. In many cases, Canadian plants are part of a larger North American system. Components cross borders multiple times before a vehicle is finished. That's not necessarily a problem, but it does mean Canada's role is often narrower than the political messaging suggests. Another key detail is concentration. The vast majority of EV investment is focused in specific regions, particularly Southern Ontario and parts of Quebec. For large parts of the country, the EV boom is something they hear about rather than experience directly. So while manufacturing does exist, it's limited in scope, regional impact, and heavily tied to decisions made by multinational corporations, whose priorities can change quickly. Which brings us to how these facilities are being financed. Electric vehicle manufacturing is expensive. Factories cost billions of dollars, battery plants require specialized infrastructure, and early production often struggles to be profitable. To make these projects viable, governments step in with subsidies. These subsidies can take many forms: direct cash payments, tax incentives, infrastructure spending, or long-term guarantees tied to production levels. In some cases, public funding reaches into the billions for a single facility. Supporters argue that this is necessary to compete with other countries that are also subsidizing aggressively. If Canada doesn't offer incentives, manufacturers will simply go elsewhere. Critics argue that this shifts risk from corporations to taxpayers, especially if long-term demand doesn't meet expectations. The uncomfortable truth is that both sides are partly right. Subsidies can help launch industries, but they also create dependence. And once a plant is built with public money, governments face pressure to keep supporting it, even if market conditions change. Which raises an important question. Are these factories competitive on their own, or only competitive because public funding makes them viable? At the same time, Canada is subsidizing domestic production. It's also operating in a global market. Electric vehicles built in other countries, particularly in Asia, are often significantly cheaper to produce. Lower labor costs, massive scale, and earlier adoption give some manufacturers a structural advantage. For Canadian consumers, cheaper imports can mean more affordable vehicles. For Canadian manufacturers, those same imports represent direct competition. This creates a tension in policy. If Canada restricts imports to protect domestic industry, prices may rise and consumer choice may shrink. If it allows large volumes of imports, domestic factories may struggle to survive without continued subsidies. There's no simple solution here. But it does mean that promises about leading the EV future can't be evaluated in isolation. They exist inside a global system where Canada doesn't control prices, technology cycles, or consumer demand. And that brings us to the impact on workers. Manufacturing jobs are often presented as the main benefit of EV investment. And to be fair, when factories open, they do create employment, both directly and indirectly. But job creation depends on stability. If a plant operates at full capacity for decades, the benefits are real and long-lasting. If production slows, pauses, or shuts down, those gains can disappear quickly. EV manufacturing introduces additional uncertainty. Automation is high, battery technology evolves rapidly, production methods can change within a few years. That means the number of workers per vehicle is often lower than in traditional auto manufacturing. It also means retraining and adaptability matter more than ever. So while EV investment can support jobs, it doesn't automatically replace the kind of large-scale employment that defined earlier automotive eras, which makes long-term planning critical. Another challenge is timing. Electric vehicle technology is still evolving. Battery chemistry is changing. Charging standards are shifting. Manufacturers are experimenting with different vehicle platforms. When a country invests heavily in one production model, it takes on risk. If that model becomes outdated faster than expected, facilities may require costly upgrades or lose competitiveness entirely. This isn't hypothetical. We've seen industries invest heavily in transitional technologies only to be overtaken by faster innovation elsewhere. For Canada, flexibility matters. Building capacity is important, but locking into a single vision of the EV future too early can limit options later, which leads to a more realistic definition of success. A realistic success story for Canada probably doesn't involve building every electric vehicle domestically. Instead, it likely involves controlling strategic parts of the system. That could mean battery materials, specialized components, software integration, or logistics expertise. It could mean being indispensable to the supply chain rather than dominant in final assembly. That kind of role is quieter. It generates fewer headlines, but it can be more resilient. Success might also mean knowing when not to compete and focusing resources where Canada has lasting advantages. That's a less dramatic story than global EV leader, but it's often one that lasts. So when politicians say Canada will build the electric vehicle future, the claim isn't necessarily false, but it's incomplete. The real story depends on details, subsidies, competition, technology, and timing. It depends on whether factories remain viable without constant public support. And it depends on whether policy balances ambition with realism. The EV future may include Canada, but how central Canada's role will be and at what cost is still very much an open question. That's the part worth paying attention to. If you found this useful, there's more like it here. This channel looks at Canadian policy without the noise, just the implications. And thanks for watching.